Three, two, one. 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, hi, this is Robert Weissman. I'm the president of Public Citizen. Thank you for joining us today for this important briefing on the coronavirus pandemic. We're going to talk a little bit about what can be done and especially about what the American people think should be done. More than a year and a half into the pandemic, we know a few things. We know that vaccines are the way out of the pandemic for all of us individually and for all of us collectively on a worldwide scale. We know that the world is suffering through a kind of shocking and unconscionable vaccine apartheid. The rate of vaccination in the United States per capita is 25 times the rate in Kenya, for example. Poor countries, by and large, do not have access to workable vaccines for the coronavirus. That makes them vulnerable to the disease. And it's not just the problem of sickness and death that they have to deal with. The economic consequences of not being able to protect themselves are devastating. Since the pandemic started on a global basis, more than 100 million people have been thrown into extreme poverty, according to the World Bank. We know other things. We know that we can solve this problem because if we scale up vaccine manufacturing, we can get vaccines to everyone on the planet who needs one. What we haven't known is what the American people think about this. We know the US hasn't acted, but we haven't known if the American people are ready and want to see action. Well, we're going to talk about that today, and it turns out they do, both because they understand the humanitarian imperative of acting and because they understand the truth that the pandemic is not going to end in the United States until it ends everywhere in the world. So today, Public Citizens is excited to reveal new polling that we commissioned from Lake Research Partners, and we'll be hearing momentarily from Celinda Lake, pollster extraordinaire, to present those findings. After Celinda presents, we'll hear from Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, a leader in Congress in demanding that the US act in a way to scale up manufacturing and get everyone in the world vaccinated. He's introduced the crucial Novid Act, and he'll talk about that and how we should go forward from there. Afterwards, we'll have a chance for a few questions from journalists who are joining us. But that's enough for me. Let me turn it over to Celinda Lake, who will present the findings of this new polling that we've commissioned. Celinda, over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be here with Public Citizen, which has been a real leader in this effort. And with the Congressman, thank you for your amazing work. I want to also acknowledge another member of our team who's on the call, Kate Gormley, who was the head of this team. So we're going to go very quickly through the data, but you can get all of the slides. They're already posted on the website at Public Citizen, so you can look in more detail. This is a very robust survey. It's a survey of 1,500 people total, and the last of the interviews were completed on August 1st. If we look at the summary of the key findings, what we find is that an overwhelming majority of voters believe it's important that countries around the world have access to vaccines so that they can vaccinate their citizens quickly and efficiently. Half of people give that an absolute 10 in terms of being important, and 81% rate it as important. In an engaged debate, a strong plurality see a role for the federal government, the US federal government, in global vaccination. And really only 20% of the public are let other countries worry about themselves. We got to take care of ourselves. People, in fact, see a lot of mutual interest in terms of getting the global vaccination rate up and feel that it is critical to getting, to clamping down on variants, to getting the global economy going, and to getting everyone protected from the pandemic, including people here at home. A solid majority of the voters favor the US government investing in a worldwide vaccine manufacturing program, which would increase production of vaccines in the US and across the globe. 2/3 of Americans favor such an investment. Half of voters strongly favor it. And you'll see there's a lot of bipartisan consensus around this. Favorability toward the government investing in worldwide vaccine manufacturing crosses demographic and attitudinal groups, including partisanship, race, and gender. So things that are dividing the public on other issues, they are united about in terms of this issue. So let's go see some of this data real quick. 78% of Americans start out saying they're concerned that people who live in less wealthy countries are not able to get vaccinated. And Democrats are universally concerned, but 2/3 of independents and Republicans are concerned. But people tend to be vaccinated, and this is likely voters, obviously. And people tend to live in families in this survey that are vaccinated. Let's look at the role of government. And here you might have thought that we would see the Republicans and the Democrats really diverge, because role of government is normally one of the things that most divides the parties. However, when we asked, how important is it that countries around the world have access to COVID-19 vaccines so their citizens can quickly and efficiently be vaccinated and protected from COVID-19? 81% of the public says, of voters say that that is important. 57% give it an absolute 10. And you'll see that ranges from 3/4 of Republicans to more than 3/4 of Democrats. So people start out believing this is important. They also, and this is the other corner pin of the argument, people start out believing 3/4 that global vaccination rates have an impact on the safety of Americans. So this is a very robust policy. Sorry, let me grab that phone and unhook it. This is a very robust policy anchored by some key attitudes out there. People at this time, August 1st, rated the administration's job as good. This was the president's highest job performance. It remains the highest job performance, even though it's come down a little bit. And people assumed that the Biden administration was engaged globally and that they were actively engaged in promoting and distributing vaccines globally. The core of the research that we did and the new findings are support for the global vaccine manufacturing program. And this is probably the most important slide that I'm going to show you. 69% of the public favoring the U.S. government, and we didn't hide the ball here. We used the dreaded G word, government, has the ability to produce vaccines. We should be doing it. And do you favor or oppose the U.S. government investing in a worldwide vaccine manufacturing program, or aren't you sure? Stunningly, 69% of the public favored it, 50% strongly, only 19% opposed it. And even though we said this is a pretty new idea to people, you can be unsure, only 12% said they were unsure. People are very strongly in favor of this policy. If we look at the next slide, 86% of Democrats favored it, 61% of independents, and a solid majority, 54-32 of Republicans favored it. Men were even more in favor of this than women. Men were even more likely to think that this would contribute to controlling the pandemic, controlling variants, and the global economy. So both men and women are very supportive, but this is one of the few policies where men are actually even more supportive than women. When we did a forced choice, when we said, okay, we should play an active role versus other countries need to take care of themselves, we're taking care of us, by 42-20, people said, no, we need an active role here. And of course, a lot of people thought we can have an active role and we can take care of ourselves. There's no reason why both of these things can't be true. So pretty robust support, even when engaged. The core policies, this isn't just one trick question that we asked and got favorability. We asked about a number of different policies, and you can see across the board, very robust support here. So donating unused and surplus vaccines, investing in increased manufacturing, calling on pharmaceutical companies to share knowledge and promote exchange, calling on pharmaceutical companies to share needed technology, increasing investment, and making additional vaccines available. All of those have almost 3/4 of the public in favor. Even waiving intellectual property rights, a little less favorable, but still 2/3 of Americans in favor of it. And you can see on these charts, the orange part of the bar, the people that are opposed, the favorable people massively outnumbering the people that are opposed to it. So point number one, broad favorability. Point number two, robust favorability across a range of policies. Why do people favor this much? Well, it's anchored in a number of beliefs and concerns that people have. So people believe and find convincing overwhelmingly that this will reduce the risk of new vaccine-resistant variants, that it will shorten the length of the pandemic, that it will help the world get the pandemic under control, that it will save money in the long run, massive amounts of money, and promote the economy, and that it will reduce the risk of vaccine-resistant variants emerging. So a very robust ideology here, or schema, that is anchored by protecting the world and America, reducing the pandemic and variants, and saving the world economy and a lot of money in the process. Last slide I'll show you. Potential consequences if we don't do this. And again, very, very, very robust numbers. A solid majority believing these are very convincing, and around 80% believing they're convincing overall. There is a belief that if we leave things unchecked, there will be mutate and new variants that will spread. That if the virus continues to spread and people don't have access to COVID, it will be more dangerous and deadly for young people and children. And that's probably more likely to be even more solidly felt today. If we don't end the COVID pandemic and allow variants to spread, it's going to have very major economic consequences worldwide and here. And that if we don't deal and get people vaccinated, there will be variants that will be more infectious, more deadly, and more resistant. And again, with the experience with the Delta variant, it is undoubtedly true that these numbers are even more robust today than they were when we polled. So in sum, strong support for this policy, contrary to what we might think at a time when America might be kind of isolationist, perceived to be in the global interest and self-interest, and anchored really on three core beliefs: that this will help get variants under control, that it will help get the pandemic under control, and therefore be less threatening, especially to young people and children, and that it will help with the global economy and save money in the long run. So Rob, let me turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Linda. It is super powerful results, and I have a ton of things I want to talk to you about it, but I'm going to get out of the way and instead turn it over to our remarkable congressional champion for moving forward with what the American people are saying they want: a scaled up global response, a U.S. engagement, a U.S. investment in global manufacturing capacity to make sure everyone in the world can get vaccinated. I'm very happy and excited to introduce Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. Congressman, thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Robert. Can you hear me, by the way?
You're good.
Great. Well, it's great to see you, and thank you to Celinda Lake for these just powerful findings. I was really struck by how universal the sentiment is in the United States for basically ramping up the U.S. government investing in ramping up the production of vaccines and distributing them throughout the world. And that is why I introduced, along with Congresswoman Jayapal and Congressman Malinowski in the House, and then Jeff Merkley and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, the Novid Act. It's a play on words, no more COVID. And what it would do is invest money in the manufacturing, then the purchase and the distribution on an end-to-end basis of 8 billion doses of vaccines to help to vaccinate 60% of the population of the world's 92 poorest countries. It makes all the sense in the world. It's the right thing to do morally, but it's also the smart thing to do, because we know that the variants that are going to be produced overseas are going to make their way here. And the scientists make it clear that within a very short period of time, if we do not vaccinate, and end the petri dish effect of having so many people unvaccinated around the world that it's only a matter of time before our vaccines are defeated here in the United States. We've already seen plenty of evidence that the Delta variant is already taking its toll against people who are vaccinated here, though the vaccinations do prevent serious cases of COVID from developing so far. But it's only a matter of time before even that is at risk. And so we have to make sure people overseas get vaccinated. So I am now trying to push, as part of the reconciliation process, the insertion of this particular piece of legislation into whatever develops in the reconciliation process. It's a modest amount of money compared to everything else that we've spent, the trillions and trillions of dollars we've spent to get ourselves vaccinated, our economies recovering, and it's cheap insurance to make sure that all of those investments are protected. What I would just ask everyone to do who's paying attention to this issue is to please urge your members of Congress, as well as the Senate, to support the Novid Act. We already had 116 members of Congress join in a letter to leadership and recently to President Biden asking that this particular piece of legislation become a part of the reconciliation process. All that being said, we need more voices to chime in now more than ever. And we need it to happen in a way that makes it an urgent priority, because there's no point in spending more money on helping families and preserving and protecting jobs if all of that is put at risk by COVID. And so please bring this up with your legislators, your members of Congress and the Senate, and as well the president, because we can't afford for COVID to exist anywhere, because it ends up being a threat to everyone everywhere. So thank you.
Thanks so much. So let me just ask you a quick question. I know that the entirety of your presentation was to this point, but I just wanted to be very clear and upfront. I think among the media and among too many policymakers, there's sort of a baseline assumption as regards COVID, but most things, that Americans are concerned about what's happening in the United States and really aren't that concerned about what's happening in other countries, and that there's some political risk in doing things that might be perceived as assisting people overseas. What does the data that you generated show as regards what we're talking about against that backdrop concern?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And there is a general trend and a general assumption, a little overstated, but frankly, largely true, that Americans take care of a few things here at home. We have problems here at home. And what's interesting here is that Americans see both a global interest and a self-interest, a national interest in this program. They also think it's totally doable. In many cases, people think that international problems are intractable. There's nothing we can do about them. They're too big. They've been conflicts for hundreds of years, whatever. Here, people think it's very doable. We had very little skepticism, which is also surprising. And the self-interest came, the self and the world interest are combined here, and came around the fact we can get the pandemic. And the Congressman, you were so eloquent. If we could have showed you to every voter, we would have won this already. That we can get the pandemic over, that we will avoid variants, and that we can get the national and the global economy going, and that we can prevent variants that will particularly put our young people and children at risk. So this is a very unique issue. And that's why we didn't just rely on one question. And it's to your credit, Rob. We asked every question. We asked the hard questions. We attacked ourselves, and we still found that this was very, very robust. People thought it was in their self-interest as well as the global interest. They were very concrete in what they thought it would do. They thought it was doable, and they thought it was an investment we need to make ASAP.
Well, Congressman, you were touching on this too, but let me just ask also sort of very directly and pointedly. The House is going to come back briefly, but not really until September. And then we're going to be in a situation with all these layers of gigantic, both issues, opportunities, and challenges with the gigantic reconciliation bill, the bipartisan bill, appropriations, still trying to deal with voting rights. What's the political space in Congress to deal with what we're talking about, the global pandemic?
Honestly, Rob, I think the political space is what we make of it. We have to create this as such a priority that it can't be ignored. Honestly, at this point, I think the Biden administration has a very stark choice. Either it can end this pandemic, or it can just manage this pandemic. And unfortunately, if we don't make it a high priority to help vaccinate all these people overseas, we are going to be muddling along and managing one disastrous variant after another, one mask mandate after another, one shutdown after another, and that is untenable. That is not only economically untenable, it's politically untenable. And it's going to happen all over the globe. Just think about this Delta variant for just a moment. 4 months ago or so, when I introduced this piece of legislation, the Delta variant was in India. I lost 3 members of my extended family to the Delta variant in India. And that is in part why I basically made this an urgent mission for my office, because at that point, I said, look, if we don't deal with these variants in India and elsewhere, such as the Delta variant, they're going to make their way to the United States. And lo and behold, it's arrived. And it's wreaking havoc, Rob. It's absolutely wreaking havoc. Here in Illinois, fortunately, we've had a governor who's done just a tremendous job, J.B. Pritzker, in managing the pandemic. And we've opened up the economy, and things looked just terrific for Chicago and everywhere here. But now we're having to deal with a mask mandate yet again in Chicago. Parents are very thankful for being able to send their children back to school, but they're worried about their unvaccinated children and what the Delta variant is going to do to them. I just say one last thing, and this resonates especially with some of my colleagues across the aisle, but it should resonate with all of us, which is right now we are dealing with a situation where the Chinese government is going around the world peddling a very, in my opinion, crappy vaccine that is not helping people, but they are reaping the diplomatic benefits of it. And they're basically pointing to our inaction as yet another sign of America's weakness and ineffectiveness in helping the rest of the world cope with COVID. And here is yet another chance where we can actually do the right thing, secure our self-interests, as Celinda mentioned before, and help to steer countries in the right direction and win the hearts and minds of a lot of people who might otherwise go down the wrong track. And so it's such a win-win-win. I can't even overstate it at this point. And so I would just say at the top of my lungs, please urge your members of Congress and Senate to get on top of this right away and make it a priority as part of the process going forward in Congress.
You know, I think one of the things that you're just underscoring so well, but I don't think has penetrated, is that when people say no one's safe anywhere unless we're all safe everywhere, that's a fact. That's not just like a nice thing to say. That's just true. And if we were uncertain about it, as you say, Delta is proving it. It's throwing it in our faces. And to not sort of absorb it is mind-boggling. But I think what Celinda's data shows is that actually the public is getting it. And we just have to sort of break through with the policymakers. Again, leaving aside the humanitarian imperative of it, just if it's how can we help the United States? You can gamble that the next Greek letter thing is not going to be worse, but it's a pretty bad gamble.
It's a bad gamble. I mean, just look at Israel. There's an excellent New York Times article about what's happening in Israel. Israel is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. And what they've found, they've done some detailed studies now about how the Delta variant has really knocked them back and thrown them into, I think they're calling it their fourth wave of infections. And so this is what we're up against, folks. I think that I would like to say that the Biden administration is doing enough, but they're not. And we have to call a spade a spade. And at this point in time, unless they make it a priority, a major priority at this point, it's not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, that means all of us are going to be living with COVID for many, many years to come. And that's just completely economically and politically unacceptable.
Yeah, so well said. So let me ask you about one thing that you were highlighting. I have to concede, despite our working together on things that are closely related over many years, it hadn't occurred to me, but you really emphasized this point about we're using the word government. I may have lost Linda.
No, I'm here.
Okay, good. That using the word government in the questions and emphasizing the governmental role in manufacturing. And you just go back and explain what you found and how that might be surprising in light of sort of settled expectations of what people think about the role of government and on this or other questions.
Yeah, so, and we use U.S. government, implying federal government. So one of the things we know in lots and lots of programs, lots and lots of research, and in long-term attitudes, that the single biggest predictor of your partisanship is your perception of the role of government. Democrats tend to be pretty in favor of a federal role for government, Republicans strongly against it, independents in between. And we started our questions with U.S. government, U.S. government, U.S. government. We were not trying to hide the ball. We didn't come to it after we had created a lot of appetite for what we were doing. And we found that we got 69, tended to get 2/3 to 3/4 support across the board. And we were getting everybody, all the Democrats, 88 to 93% in favor. But among Republicans, we were getting solid majority up to 2/3 in favor, and for independents, 2/3 as well. So what was really, really stark here is that people were making an exception to their general reservation about government and federal government to be in support of these policies. And that lack of polarization, particularly in the current political environment, is very, very rare.
Congressman, as we wind down, let me just ask one more thing of you. And well, before doing that, just to appreciate again your leadership. I think it's, our condolences on the family members lost. I think, so many of us have lost family and friends from this pandemic here, but your sort of unfortunate insight about the global nature of it has, I think, been transformational. And to take that insight and then convert it into such great leadership, we're so appreciative. And what a good way to honor them. But just to sort of double back on the Novid Act, if you could just again outline for people what the components are of your proposal, how straightforward it is, and what it would deliver for people.
It's very straightforward. Basically, we invest $34 billion in three things. First, the scaling up of the production of vaccines. Secondly, the purchases of these vaccines. And third, the end-to-end delivery of these vaccines. So we don't want to just drop off a bunch of vaccines, at some port somewhere in a foreign country. We actually want to work with the local governments and NGOs to get it into the arms of people who need it. Just to put in perspective what the dire need is, in Africa alone, there are 1.2 billion people, and less than 5 million doses, 5 to 10 million doses, have actually been administered of any vaccine. And that's just completely unacceptable. And I think that we have to recognize, just as we did with PEPFAR and the elimination of HIV/AIDS in Africa, where we spent, by the way, I believe it is 65 to 70 billion dollars to save the lives of 20 million people. We are proposing to spend 34 billion, so under half of what we spent on PEPFAR, to save far more lives. And I think that we have to do this. And PEPFAR, as you know, and now what Celinda is saying makes a lot of sense in terms of the incredible bipartisan support we saw for PEPFAR through the George W. Bush administration, then the Obama administration, and of course, the Trump and the Biden administration. It has received tremendous support. And I think the American people are a good people. They want other people to be well, not just for their self-interest, but because it is the morally right thing to do. And here, I just argue it makes all the sense in the world. We need it right now, the Novid Act, because it will make a huge positive difference for all of us very quickly.
Yeah, well, I think that's so spot on, and you've been so eloquent about it. You know, from our point of view, I mean, you said it just so well. The case for action is so overwhelming. There just really is not a case for inaction. Had the action. If you just think about the humanitarian need and the outrage of the vaccine apartheid you're describing, you think about the fact that we can't solve the pandemic here until we solve it globally. If you think about the economic consequences here from diminution in international trade, which is in the order of trillions of dollars globally because of the ongoing pandemic. If you think about the lost opportunity to establish foreign policy leadership and demonstrate our humanitarianism, our openness, our willing to share our scientific capacity and to invest to save people's lives, all those things being left on the table, and you ask why, and I don't have a good answer, but it has seemed to us that the best, if infuriating answer was, well, there was a view that the American people didn't want action, that they were only concerned about what was going on domestically, and they would be upset if we were doing something overseas when the pandemic wasn't solved at home. And for us, this polling, and the reason we wanted to investigate this question was to see if that was true. And it turns out it's not only not true, the opposite is true. The American people affirmatively want us to act. They understand each of those arguments that you've made. They've made clear in this polling data by overwhelming numbers. They want to see the US government act. They want to see the US government invest in expanded manufacturing and distribution. They want to see the world vaccinated.
They want to see
this polling data, I think, is so crucial, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to get it in front of all policymakers so they know if that was the thing that was holding them back, they should stop being held back, and it's time for action now.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? I think the economic point can't be overstressed. I think that, you know, the hospitality and tourism industry have been decimated across the country because of lack of international tourists. And it's starting to bounce back in places, mainly because of domestic tourism, which is a good thing. But, you know, I happen to represent the O'Hare corridor, so to speak. I represent the runways, but not the terminals, which is another discussion. But you talk to United or American or any of the numerous international carriers that visit O'Hare, which is one of the world's busiest airports, and you see there's just a lack of people coming here because we've closed our borders off to many of these countries that would otherwise send millions of tourists from Europe alone, for instance, let alone Asia and other places. And so it's no wonder that even in the South and in Republican areas, so to speak, they want these people to come back, but they know that they need to be vaccinated first. But I did want to say, Rob and Celinda, it's just been an absolute delight and pleasure to be with you. I have to jump now to my next engagements, but I'm so grateful for your partnership, and Celinda for your excellent work, and someone of your stature to be looking at this and explaining the data is a real treat. And Rob, thank you for Public Citizen and everybody leading the charge with us. And again, there's no good reason at this point to not do what we're asking. And so just please let us know how we can continue to be helpful in the fight here.
Well, thanks so much for your leadership, and I'm sure we're going to get this done together. Thank you, and feel free to sign off. We're gonna wind down now. Let me just say that the polling data, both the summary information and the full raw data, is posted at the Public Citizen website at citizen.org. If anyone in the media comes across this and wants to follow up with us, please reach out to our press office. We'll go through this in detail, as well as connect you up with Celinda if you have any questions. Celinda, thank you so much for your work on this, and we're going to be calling on you again. And we appreciate all of you for tuning in with us. We have a lot of work to do. As the Congressman said, we've got to get this Novid Act done, and the real pathway forward for us right now is to get it included in the budget reconciliation. So all of you members and supporters, just viewers out there, stay tuned, stay in touch with us. That's our next effort in this campaign to end the global pandemic, to scale up global manufacturing and make sure everyone in the world is vaccinated as a matter of self-interest, but above all, to take care of everyone on the planet as we should do. Thanks so much. That's the end.